Hi, my name is Tabithar Musa, and I'm responding to your discussion board three, in which you talked about Lehman's research, and you focused on certain areas of both the predictable predictor variables, what the question was, research question was, the strength and the limitation of the research. I will address it one after the other. You felt like the research question was asking whether variation in psychological distress and well-being can be accounted for by the individual's perceived relationship with God or how they view God. That was a bit. I mean, that was what I kind of gleaned a bit of that from my own summary. And what I kind of got from there for the question was I felt that the primary question there was whether an individual's perception of God's image accounts for the variation in his psychological distress or mental health well-being. And more or less, like, for I felt the question that was being asked whether there's a relationship between the attachment to God or how one sees God to one's psychological distress or well-being. And so I felt that there were a lot of common grounds in what you felt was the research question then. Another thing that stood out to me was you talked about the predictable variables were attachment to God and image of God. I did feel that the predictable variables had to do with the attachment to God and how one sees God. But I guess I leaned more towards the fact that it was looking at the two dimensions of the attachment of God. That means you're looking at how the perceived image of God as against how one's relationship is with God. So that I felt stood out to me more as the predictive variables. But I guess we both were right in from my what I read from your article, that what you were saying from your post was that the level of attachment or lack of attachment or perceived relationship of how your relationship is with God is an essential factor in connecting between one's psychological health or mental well-being. One of the things I gleaned from your post that you had written about was about, you also talked about the different findings, what you felt were the strengths and the limitations. I think the fact that you raised that one of the strengths was that it was done by a professional polling organization, and that its initial sample, I felt that the initial sample was a large, random, and more representative sample. But after going through what you said about the fact that the sample group was mostly Christians, American Christians, so that kind of became a limitation for me, because if they try this study on a larger group, a more diverse group, would the outcome be the same? That is a question that needs an answer. I do believe that I found it to be a limitation that the responders were not representative of all Americans and they might be less religious. And another limitation I noticed for me then was the fact that the self-reporting surveys, there's a possibility of the risk of responders bias on the part of the participants. So I noticed you also raised that as a point. What you could take away, I read what seems to be your takeaway from this post leans more towards one's attachment to God is more significant in psychological well-being than one's image of God. So for me, I felt like if that sounds very logical. If just like you stated, if I believe God to be a good, kind, and loving God, and I have a great relationship with Him, my view of Him will be different. Well, if I believe God is kind and gentle, but my relationship with Him is damaged, I will think that He is not available. I would like to round up by stating this. When I became a Christian, one of the things that kind of leaned me in was the way I got Christ introduced to me personally. And I remember then he was more or less introduced like a friend, a helper, like a best friend, and that's my approach to things concerning my relation, my walk with my Christian walk. I've always been talking to God the helper, God the friend, God my father, like about a personal relationship, an intimate relationship. So I guess that kind of determines how I deal with issues when it comes to my relationship with God. So I do see where the attachment to God and how one perceives God matters. It plays is an essential factor and plays a major role. So I did enjoy reading most of your posts, and I hope I was able to add a little bit to the conversation. Thank you.